On this episode of The Blue-Headed Stepchild, we're talking about immigration, and not just as a political flashpoint based on the current events, but as a human issue rooted in history, policy, and justice. Check it out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Blue-Headed Stepchild. I'm your host, Sam Lee. Today, we're going to talk about immigration. Today's guest is Glenaan O'Neil. She is the Legal Operations Manager for RAICES. Okay, Glenaan, welcome to the show. Tell us, what do you do? Who is RAICES? Give us a little bit of backstory here.
Sure. So I'm the Legal Operations Manager at RAICES. And my position there is basically to help support the legal services by creating processes, procedures. I'm not front lines myself anymore, but I have been. And so I keep that in mind as I'm trying to support the people doing the work as best I can. What we do at RAICES is we provide both refugee resettlement and legal services to immigrants. We also do litigation, and we're still here doing the best that we can, serving the community in whatever way we're still able to.
And I remember back in Trump's first term, I think that was maybe 2017-ish, when RAICES came to the forefront based on family separation, the zero tolerance policies at the border, right? When they were separating kids from their parents.
Yeah.
And I remember RAICES came up quite a bit then for the work they were doing. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We have teams that work with detained individuals across the state in different ways, right? We have one team that was working specifically with kids, and they were seeing kids brought in who had been separated from their families. And we also have a team that works with recent arrivals around the border. And between the two of them, they really were able to paint a picture of exactly what was happening and the ways in which immigration was being used to punish people for being here and how that punishment was being meted out to families.
Sure. And so, man, it seems like a lifetime ago, right?
Yeah.
That happened.
Yeah.
And so tell me, what's the reality of the legal services that RAICES and your team is offering now? If you're still offering legal advice to people in detention, to children, or has that shifted under the current environment? Give me a broader scope of some of the services that you guys provide.
Sure. So we do have two programs, right? We have a refugee resettlement program, which is very separate to the work. Well, not very separate. It's connected, obviously, but it is a separate department within RAICES from the legal services, which is where I work, right? And we've got multiple programs there. We have an asylum access team that works specifically with detained adults and families in Central Texas and helps them to preserve their ability to apply for asylum or respond to the expedited removal process. Do you know what the expedited removal process is?
It's when you get the notice to appear and then...
So that's the removal process generally,
in general,
right?
okay.
Yeah. The expedited removal process is a way in which an individual can be put into the queue to be deported without having to see a judge, right?
Gotcha.
They go before an ICE agent as opposed to a judge. And it happens a lot faster than it would. I mean, expedited, right? It used to be interpreted as something that could only be applied to folks who have been in the U.S. for 2 years or less. But under the current administration, that has been broadened.
Right.
So that's... that's in and of itself a big change, right?
Yeah.
But we are still providing legal services to those detained families and adults who are facing that. We are also providing legal services to individuals and families in other ways, right? We have a team that does removal defense, a team that's doing affirmative applications, which basically means that you're not in front of a judge, but you are applying for status before you're put into proceedings.
And I've seen stats posted, and tell me what's right here, that people that have representation, right, are 10, 15x more likely to...
I think it's
20x,
Yeah.
right, to have a positive outcome on their case, right?
That's correct.
And so just by being in contact with your services, right, people aren't going it alone. They aren't going up against immigration judges, the ICE agents, whoever it is, whatever, whatever silo they're in, right? And whoever it is that makes the determination on their case, by being in contact, they are more likely to have a more positive outcome, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And so what do you say, recently there's been the argument that people coming here shouldn't even have access to due process, right? That it is not protected by the Constitution, and that they shouldn't even be going in front of a judge, let alone get legal representation, and that they should just be deported without due process.
What do I think of that idea?
I mean, is that a fair interpretation of the law? Like, regardless of the humanity of it, but is it a fair argument that, hey, that's not how the system should be?
I think inherently, anytime somebody says that a person in the United States of America should not be afforded due process, that should have your hackles up. It should have flags up. I don't think that's something anyone should accept.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair enough. All right. I've read that RAICES has mentioned before that the immigration system feels like a maze to keep people out, right? Can you walk us through an example of how bureaucracy or a policy intentionally creates barriers?
Yes. Gosh, which one to pick? I think probably one of the ones that's my favorite or easiest for people to understand is that to apply for an employment authorization.
An EAD.
That's an EAD, that's right. To get a work permit, you have to pay, right? But you can't work before you have the work permit.
That's a good example.
So how do you do that? And you can't really waive that in many applications. So you have to have the money just somehow magically.
Right.
So I think that's a really good example.
That is. And so, right, for some people that have support systems in the U.S. that may have generations of family, right, they might get that extra hand up.
Right.
But somebody that's coming it alone that literally has nothing, right?
Yeah.
And then they're trying to get a work permit to work, right, and to pay taxes.
Right. Many people without work permits do pay taxes. But yeah, people want to be able to contribute. They want to be able to build a life. And it just is a test of proximity to privilege to a degree to require them to have $385, $400 some odd dollars just sitting around before they have the authorization to work.
Yeah. No, it's catch-22, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, it's a good example. And then there's an argument being floated right now on the other side that says our immigration system is too lax, right? And that it's not a maze and it's not too difficult. In fact, it's too easy. And one of the policies that's often talked about is catch and release, right? It's the idea that people come in, and I believe if they have like a sponsor or something like that, they're released with a notice to appear, and then are supposed to come back to a court hearing, right? And then there's also the idea that we have a more family-based green card and immigration system versus other countries where it's more employment based and you're applying on merits of education and like work skills and that sort. What do you say to that and that?
Well, I mean, my immediate response is to absolutely reject that out of hand, right? If you're calling what we do in our immigration system catch and release, I think that means you know more about fishing than you do about immigration. I mean, not to be too glib, but I would really invite those people to sit down and learn more about the family-based immigration system before saying that it's easy to navigate. There are a lot of myths out there and oversimplifications about how the process works. It is complicated on purpose as a guardrail. And you can take that however you want, but it is not easy, right? And people who come to the United States and declare that they want to apply for asylum in front of a judge are doing exactly what immigration law tells them to do. So I think that it is just a false premise to say anything about the immigration system is easy.
Yeah. And I've read too that 8 out of 10 people that arrive don't fit into the narrow categories of asylum that we have.
Yes.
And that, for example, other countries that have adopted more broader interpretations of what asylum is, the Cartagena Declaration, I think, is one of the ones in Central America that allows for, a more, I guess, up-to-date and modern approach to asylum. And so people arrive and it's very narrow what the categories they fit into, right?
It's a very narrow door opening that is closing a little bit every day, I would say. It is very difficult to get asylum in this country. And I think that anybody who thinks that the way that people have to apply for asylum is easy, again, they just really have never seen an asylum application or been through that.
Sure. Which brings me to my next question. I think the United States has this unique history about immigrants and celebrating immigration, right? I think unless you're Native American, most Americans can trace their heritage back few generations to where their ancestors immigrated to the United States, right?
Yeah.
And so whether it's Irish, Polish, African, wherever you immigrated for, and it used to be part of the national identity, right? And celebrated this sense of immigrants making us stronger through diversity.
Yeah.
How have we lost that? And it's the complete opposite now in that immigrant is demonized and not celebrated.
Well, I think there are a couple of ways to answer that question, right? First off, I think there's the fact that certain kinds of immigrants have been welcomed and that window has changed as our definition of whiteness and privilege have changed, right? I was just at Ellis Island last week on a family vacation, and I happened to see a plaque that had my great-grandfather's name on it.
Really?
He came to the United States when he was 17 years old from Italy, right? He was an unaccompanied minor, actually. And it was wild to see that and to know that what he went through is probably not that different from what a lot of my clients are going through, in that as the years pass, we are able to strip the degradation away from the stories that our families tell. But we still, we remember as a culture that there used to be Irish need not apply everywhere, or no Italians, that sort of thing. And as families and populations are in the United States for longer, they accrete privilege, they accrete acceptance. And so right now, what I think we're seeing is a pretty virulent form of xenophobia that is directed at a new population. Used to be at these other groups that have now been accepted. And it's just a constantly moving door to try to get through into privilege.
Yeah. And it almost feels like they're just, I wouldn't say scapegoats, but distractions almost, right?
Doesn't it almost feel that way?
Like we're creating an enemy to make us angry because life is hard. And instead of trying to make life easier through providing basic things, instead we're creating an enemy, right?
And the heartbreak is that these are people, right? These are human beings, just like you are, I am. They have their own life stories. They have their hopes. And if you sat down and you talked to someone, you would care about them. But to turn it into a monolith is a completely different story.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good answer. Okay. And then tell me more about Texas specifically. The great state of Texas. And so Texas has been at the forefront, right, of I always think Texas is interesting in that in general, it's at the forefront of a lot of social issues. Right? You've got a changing demographic in Texas, right? Through urbanization with some of our big cities. We've got 4 of the largest population cities out of the top 15 in the United States, and they're growing. And they're becoming more liberal and younger. And I think that against the backdrop of the old conservative red state, Texas, has not just made immigration at the forefront, but, anything from healthcare to THC we're talking about yesterday, right? And so a lot of issues. But what are some of the unique issues or challenges that you face because we're in Texas?
Well, so there's just the geography of it, right? We have the largest border with another country of any of the individual states that are in the continental U.S., right? So it's a very present day-to-day thing. But on top of that, the state has taken it upon themselves to do a level of enforcement that is usually federal in nature.
For example, Operation Lone Star.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, right? And that's an obstacle to navigate, right? It is completely different than the stance some other states have taken. And so to be caught between both federal and state enforcement really charges things for the immigrant communities that we're serving here and for the folks who are trying to serve them.
Yeah. And I guess from a legal perspective, too, when you're layering state and federal, right, it must get tricky about who has precedent here, right? And what's the one where... It was Senate bill. It was SB. It was a low number, maybe SB3 a couple years ago, in which it gave local authorities the ability to make immigration arrests.
Yeah, so immigration is a civil matter, right? It is not something that is criminal in nature, and so enforcing on civil stuff or criminalizing is an interesting wrinkle.
Yeah. Headache.
It's different than you would find in, say, Washington State or Oregon State, but...
Yeah, but in the same vein, it's nice to think that although there are more challenges here, perhaps if you can be successful here, maybe you can be successful anywhere.
One can hope, right? I think it's the vanguard of a pushback for humanity and for welcome for these people who are coming to the United States. And nobody really is going to come here and declare asylum just because.
Right.
That people don't do that on a whim. I live in North Austin, and it's hard to get me to drive to South Austin. Can you imagine? Like, how many people do you know who move to a different part of the city, and then you're like, I guess I'll never see you again?
Yeah, it's true.
And I know that that's glib.
Right.
And I don't mean to make light. I'm just trying to make it human so that people can see the degree to which folks have to be desperate to make these moves. And that's why it's important for us to be here.
Yeah.
That's why it's important for people to be pushing back in spaces like Texas.
Yeah. I always used to try to, when I worked in immigration and refugee services and talking to, people that didn't align, I used to dumb it down to a very put yourself in their shoes example. And where I would say, okay, you live just the other side of the border and you say, hey, if I can somehow get over there, I can make 50 times the amount of money. I can live a safer life. I can set up a base for my family for generations to come. And so am I going to stand here and wait? Or am I going to try to get over there?
Right. Well, and the other
I know that seems very dumbed down, but well,
sometimes you have to, right? Because of that thing where folks don't think of immigrants as humans. They think of immigrants, the monolith, the invasion, the wave, whatever it is that has been created in their mind, rather than thinking about you, Sam, are a person who have made choices that exist in context, right?
Right.
But for me, it's yeah, it would be better over there, but think about how bad it would have to be for you to leave everything you know, your home, your family, your language, your way of life. What would it take for you to make those decisions? And don't we owe that person respect and compassion for doing that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so I'm sure from a legal perspective that your advice to clients is to always follow the law. Now, nowadays, currently, like bringing this very relevant to what's happening right now. When someone receives a notice to appear and is supposed to attend a court date, it's quite possible that they could be apprehended at that court date by ICE right then and there. And so they're following what they're supposed to do. They're following the law, right? How are you and your team and RAICES as an organization navigating this? And if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm supposed to be at court on Wednesday. However, I'm watching the news and people are getting
and I'm scared.
Detained and I'm scared. However, I want to try to follow this pathway and do what I'm supposed to do in order to have my best chance at a positive outcome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that goes right back to your question about obstacles and mazes, right? I mean, you're trying to do the right thing. You're following the law. You may even qualify in some cases, and then you get apprehended as you continue to follow the law. That right there is just a great example of the way that this is almost, I mean, it's Kafkaesque at times. But there are ways that we can advocate, and there are things that we can do to protect our clients. There are virtual appearances that can be put in. And so that's something that we're moving toward as much as possible, asking for our clients to appearing virtually with them as opposed to going in person. Whatever we can do to keep our clients in, compliance with what they need to do, but in a safer situation, we will do.
Sure. And I saw, and I don't know if RAICES is doing this, but I saw some other organizations are even taking volunteers and volunteers to just accompany people to their court dates, right? And just to have somebody else there as a little bit of a buffer or support, and so they don't feel as vulnerable.
Well, when we're providing removal defense and representation, our legal representatives are there, right? And so, it's not something where we really are sending folks on their own when we're representing them. But it's a matter of like, let's be extra careful and let's see if we can do this virtually.
And what are the realities of, is this, hey, this has happened 5 times across the United States in the past 6 months, and all 5 of those have been replayed on TV 100 times? Or does it feel like, this is a 50-50 shot right now about where this could go?
I don't have statistics at my fingertips on this, but I can tell you, we just had a management training in San Antonio where a bunch of the folks who have been at RAICES for a long time got together and we talked about like, how are we going to position? What are we going to do? And just in idle conversation, one of the legal assistants who was there shared with me that they had gone to a hearing, and I think it was Dallas, and they'd gone to the bathroom with the client and they came out. There was an ICE agent waiting there, right? Actually, no, it wasn't our client. Let me rephrase that. Let me say that again. They had gone to the bathroom and they saw an ICE agent waiting outside of the bathroom for somebody who had gone into the bathroom at the same time they did. And while the person was not apprehended right in front of them, they knew that that was the ICE agent's intent to do that. So clearly the presence is there. The intent is there. I can't tell you how many times it has happened. But I think that it's not an unreasonable fear.
Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds scary.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's, you must feel like you're fighting all the time, right?
I think that's a fair way to put it. I think that, everybody who is in this field right now seems to be feeling besieged. Like, Hunter S. Thompson, we're in bat country. That's a little bit what it feels like, right? Like there are things coming at you from all directions and you can't necessarily predict what the next one is.
Right.
But all you can do is the best that you can do for as long as you can.
For sure. Okay. All right. Greater macro socioeconomic.
Okay, let's get into it.
30,000 view question here. The last major immigration overhaul was during the Reagan administration in the 80s when part of the overhaul was amnesty, meaning to almost 3 million undocumented immigrants, they gave everybody a pathway to citizenship, right? In addition to other things. In 2013, there was the Gang of Eight bill, which would have been a sweeping overhaul, but that failed. In your opinion, what does a comprehensive immigration overhaul look like? And,
yeah.
because we're talking about the minutia, right? Like we're talking about um, the effects,
right,
of the policy. But how do we rethink this, right?
Well, I think you have to start at the most basic of blocks, which is before we even get into legislation, is to break down this perception of an invasion or whatever it is that people are saying, and remind people, as I've been saying, that these are human beings, right? Like, I think before we even try to legislate anything, we have to make sure that people see the humanity of this. I genuinely believe when you see another person in front of you that needs help, most people are going to want to help them. And I think that that's the most important part of what we have to do to make change. Because if you can approach this from a place of welcoming, if you can approach this from a place of responding to the humanity of someone else, then I think we can make better choices that reflect who we want to be instead of what we're trying to leave behind us.
Yeah. Okay, so how do we do that?
How do we do that?
Right? No, I get what you're saying, right? It starts with the perception and humanizing other people before you can even get to the point of
Right.
changing legislation.
Right.
And we're not too far removed from that, in which like immigration was, is a bipartisan issue, right?
Mhm.
Like I said, the Reagan administration was the last one to do a large-scale amnesty and immigration overhaul. The Gang of Eight bill in 2013 was bipartisan. It was 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans. And so it wasn't too long ago that we were there, in which we were thinking this more of, okay, what makes sense for employment and logistics and families and these sorts of things. And so how do we get back to that?
How do we get back to that? I mean,
No,
as
you
you
can't
said,
ask me the same
no,
question I asked you.
I know. But I mean, you just said that 2017 feels like it was a lifetime ago,
Yeah.
right? And so I don't think that we can say that and at the same time say it wasn't that long ago that
Yeah,
we were able to
sure.
talk about this in a bipartisan way, because at this point, there's like almost a knee-jerk response that people have that sort of reverts to, I think click is the wrong word for it, but like a us versus them team thing rather than a critical thinking standpoint that allows you to assess what's in front of you and think about logistics. And I think that we have to take this out of a reactive space before we can get there. Because I mean, even for me, right, like thinking about working in a collaborative space about that, my hackles get up because I'm like, well, I don't know if they're talking about people or if they're talking about these shadow nightmares they've created. Right. And so I think for all of us, we're in a place where we have to remember that it's people, not issues.
Right. Okay. And then, not to keep pushing you on this, but all right.
I'm not going to write you legislation reform. That's not me.
But I'm curious about like what that looks like, It's like, it feels like the immigration system has been broken for so long, and it was,
Mm-hmm.
and what does, I don't know, maybe it's an international comparative study about, is there a country that has an immigration system that feels like it's working, right?
Well, maybe it's just staffing immigration appropriately. You could start there.
Okay. All right. Glenaan O'Neil would staff everybody to the fullest.
Glenaan O'Neil, job creator.
Job creator. Gotcha. I'll be sure to put that in the description
Exactly.
of the podcast.
No, I mean, I think it's to do an international study would be interesting, right? And you could use that data in a lot of ways, but at the same time, not every country is going to have the same interests, right?
Yeah.
And even with that, I really do keep coming back to, I don't think the law fixes this, right? I think the law is a tool that can be used to codify what we agree upon as humans, right? But I don't necessarily think that it is what fixes this, because we're seeing law used in ways that is punitive. So reform, I think more than reform, just like a reset is what's needed.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. All right. What can everyday people, especially those listening here in Austin, do to support immigrant communities and the work RAICES is doing?
So our website does have ways for people to get involved. There are ways that people can give back to the community either by volunteering. We do have a pretty substantial volunteering arm across the state. And there's also obviously donations. We're not going to say no to that, but check out the website and there are definitely options there.
Okay. And what would donations go towards? And then give us a couple examples of some of the opportunities for volunteering.
Well, I mean, I don't really know exactly what every donation would go towards, right? The legal services we perform is sort of what I would generally point it toward.
Okay.
But volunteering opportunities could be translating documents, could be assisting and listening to voicemails. It really just depends on what the need is in the moment.
Excellent. Do you have anything else?
No, I mean, is there anything? I know you want me to give you a legislation.
No.
But is there anything else that you'd like to know or that you want to talk about?
Let me think. No, I don't think so. I think, I think what you've kept coming back to here is like the humanization of it all, right? And kind of changed like this,
Mm-hmm.
the narrative before we can get far on logistics and nuts and bolts of changes and all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. It's more of a narrative change, right? It's a paradigm shift on how we look at it, right?
Yeah.
And so
I mean, that's sort of the way I look at it because the laws are so archaic and complicated and curly
yeah,
cued, and then you can use them to do whatever you want. But I mean, I think we see it like in the marches and the things that people are saying about like, no, that was my neighbor. They took my
right.
neighbor. Like people care. They just don't realize they care.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's man, I mean, and I see it all day, every day. It's like, and especially in construction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where people are, I feel like that's one of the front lines where people,
Mm-hmm.
white Americans, interface with immigrant communities is in
Yeah.
construction
And the service industry.
and the service industry, and just like having that connection and having that experience, it just changes people, right? It's just
It
it's
really
human.
does. I mean, it's just, I think people don't, they just don't put it together, right? Like he's one of the good ones, but when you're
Right.
breaking it down into the good ones, that already means that you've created a narrative that has nothing to do with people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I don't know. I don't know. Do you ever feel crazy like people are stupid and like, no, I mean, not to say, and
No.
obviously none of
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
yeah, but like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like maybe I'm the one that's the idiot, right? In that, how are people getting suckered into just like these silly narratives of like demonizing people, and they seem so transparent and see through.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, they're criminals and rapists and that sort of thing, and then even though you're having human experiences in the in your service industry job,
Mhm.
like you still go home with like this ignorant view or whatever
Yeah.
it is, and it's like, man, are people stupid, or I'm at the point like questioning myself and like,
Right.
am I not seeing something here in that people are people? I don't know. I'm sorry, it's not very articulate. What
No,
I'm
I
saying.
actually, I really hear what you're saying. It's, you get so angry sometimes when you're in this activist work, right?
Mhm.
Not that I necessarily think that what I'm doing should be activist,
Yeah.
right? I think it's more than anything like I'm just showing up to like help y'all fill out some paperwork. I don't feel like that's an activist thing.
All right.
But you get so angry sometimes because you're like, how did we get here? How did we get to a point where we are on purpose being so hurtful?
Yeah.
And I think it's because there are a lot of easy off ramps to thinking about it,
Mhm.
right? Like it's an easy exit to just think about yourself and think about your problems.
Right.
And it's hard.
And it goes back to like, life is hard,
Right.
like in that
You're
people are
right.
just struggling every day to, pay their bills. I saw
Uh-huh.
something the other day. It's like, um, making $100,000, is people are struggling that make $100,000 a year,
Yeah.
right? Into I don't know, pay rent or mortgage and food and all these sorts of things. And so if you're just like tired and you're working really
Yes.
hard and you're not getting ahead and you're angry at somebody, right?
And where do you put that?
Where do you
becomes the
put that?
question.
Exactly.
Where do you put that? Because it's very hard to be angry at a general, like, abstract system.
Right.
Right? But, like, if there's some one person you can be angry at, even if that person is a fiction,
Right.
that is easier to fight against
Right.
than to sort of give in to despair. But, like, yeah, I think everybody's individual struggle is so heavy to carry
Yeah.
that, like, being aware of other people's struggles is sometimes a big ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I think it is.
Yeah.
There are days that I would love to not care.
Yeah.
It would be so much easier to
Yeah.
not care. But I think that it's a choice that we have to make every day to care because
for
we want
sure.
people to care about us. So
Yeah.
you have to do that.
Yeah, no, in the same way that, it's incumbent on those of us that have something, right? That have some type of privilege or leg up in this world.
Right.
It's incumbent on us to look out for others. It's also that exists for others above us to look out for us,
Yeah.
like.
Yes. No, that's 100% true. Like, we
Right.
want people to look after us.
Mm,
That means we have to be in community with others, too, to expect community to come back to us.
right.
And I think that we lose that piece
Mm-hmm.
sometimes.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to lose that piece because, I mean, who is their best after fighting all day to get the littlest amount that you can?
Yeah.
And then knowing that you have to do it tomorrow and you
Yeah.
have to do it the next day. Nobody's their best.
Yeah. It's defeating.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is something we've had to talk to our team about
Yeah, I'm sure.
a lot.
I'm sure.
Is how are we redefining a win?
Yeah.
How are we redefining what success looks for us as doorways get narrower, as obstacles get bigger, as it becomes harder to do what we do? How do we think about what we're doing as successful?
Mm.
And there's that statistic you pointed to, like 20% more likely to be able to stay here. But it's just, I mean, I think everybody's seen that meme where every day your best looks different. But, like, I think showing up has to be a big part of it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Awesome. All right, guys, that wraps up our episode today. Thank you to Glenaan. We'll put all of her information down below in the caption, as well as ways you can get involved with RAICES. Thanks.